Hi, I'm Jessica, and when I'm not drinking all the coffee, watching Razorback sports, or hanging out with my family of boys, it's my passion to help elementary music teachers just like you find your unique teaching style. My goal with this podcast is to share helpful tips, strategies, and to give you the motivation you need to gain momentum in your teaching so you can continue being the music teacher rock star you already are. Welcome back to the podcast. You are listening to episode 73, and this is an interview with Kelly Surette, and she is an adaptive music educator and works specifically with special needs students and teaching them music. So if you're not familiar with adaptive music education, this episode will give you so much information about it and how you can work with special needs students in your music classrooms. This episode is all about strategies for working with special needs students in the music room, especially deaf and hard of hearing, and technology adaptations you can make with your students. So a little bit more about Kelly before we dive into this episode. She has been an adaptive music educator for almost a decade, and she works specifically with students who have special needs as well as deaf and hard of hearing individuals with disabilities. Kelly is a speaker, blogger, and author of Creative Miracles, a practitioner's guide to adaptive music instruction, to be released in fall of 2019. So by the time you're listening to this, the book may already be released. So make sure you look for that. You can find Kelly at kellysurette.com, and on her website, you can find her blog, her book release information, and you can contact her. So without further ado, let's dive right in with today's episode with Kelly. All right, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. Today, I'm so excited to be joined by Kelly. I introduced her a little bit in the podcast intro, but I'm going to let her just tell us a little bit more about herself and the work that she does. So welcome to the podcast, Kelly.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. This is awesome. Yeah, so I have been working with students who have all different varying special needs. For about the last decade, I've been working with this population. And over the last few years, that has grown to include students who are deaf and hard of hearing with disabilities as well. So I'm very excited to be on here and kind of talk more about that because I think it's such a underserved community in regards to music education. So I can't wait to tell you a little bit more.
Yeah, I I was telling you before we started recording, I'm so excited to have you on here and to interview you about this because this is something I'm definitely not knowledgeable about. And it's, in college, music education majors take a class and it's one semester and it's every special need lumped into one semester. And so it's so hard, when you see a student that is hard of hearing or deaf, um, to know what to do with them in the music room so much because there's not a lot of, like you said, there's not a lot of training around it and it's not talked about a lot. And so I just can't wait to pick your brain about this today. So, okay, we're going to talk about strategies for working with special needs students in the music room. So I would assume that you agree that all kids can learn music no matter what their disability or diagnosis. And I would love for you to just talk and give us any tips around this.
Absolutely. I mean, 100%. I have had I've I want to say a lot of different students with special needs of the gamut
Mm-hmm.
over the last decade. And I've had students who, everything from no arms and no legs with a dream to play the piano,
Mm.
want to learn the piano, to profoundly deaf students with autism who, you know, are either sort of thrust into who aren't really getting their needs met in terms
Right.
of music education. We have students who are sort of put in these general music classes where they're kind of understimulated or overstimulated. We have students who are put in music therapy, which is a wonderful practice, but not the same thing as music education. Or they don't even have music whatsoever. There isn't even music on their schedule. So I believe that every single student regardless of disability, regardless of barriers to entry for sound access, whatever it is, that all students can and should have a relationship to music. And so, me as their music teacher, it is my job to facilitate that relationship. And so I do so by making adaptations for each individual need in the classroom.
I love that. I would love to pick your brain about different examples you can give for ways you've adapted music for different kiddos you've seen. Because I know you said you've seen so many different disabilities or, learning needs. And so what are specific ways you've adapted for some students when it comes to learning music?
Absolutely. So I would say I make 3 different adaptations based on 3 different senses. And one of those senses is sound, hearing, adapting for different hearing modalities, whether that's someone that's overstimulated by sound or someone that has limited sound access because of a hearing loss, or technology that addresses hearing loss. I also always make an adjustment for visuals, the sense of the eyes and sight. And then the third is tactile sensations and the sense of touch. So I sort of address in every lesson I teach and in everything that I do in the adaptive music classroom, I'm looking at ways to adapt for all of those different senses. As much as all at once as I can. So, if I have a student who has, has like a sensory processing disorder and sound just overwhelms them and visual lights overwhelm them and, vibrating floors and big booming basses overwhelm them, that's an adjustment and an adaptation in one direction to sort of, turn that down. How can I adjust that? How can we position the student in the room so that they can receive music in the best way for them without becoming overwhelmed? Yeah. On the other side of that, if I have students with hearing loss, they might benefit from the full visual spectrum. How can music be made visual? Definitely through vibrations and touch and tactile sensations, and sound. Obviously we want more volume in some of these cases, and remembering to modify specifically for someone wearing a cochlear implant that is different from someone wearing a hearing aid. How they interpret the sound is totally different, so keeping little things like that in mind. And also even environmental shifts, making sure that the room isn't this big giant space that's echoey, but also not too small where students in wheelchairs are on top of each other and can't move around. There's so many adaptations I make. I make physical adaptations for students with cerebral palsy who have limited mobility, in terms of playing instruments, finding ways to make instruments accessible for them. I have students that, I have full-bodied able students who can dance a whole dance class, and then I have other students that can only answer a question on a head switch, and it's a yes or no question most of the time, or do you want more, or are you all done? So it's really looking at the way I approach adaptive music instruction and the way that I lay out adaptive music instruction in my book that's coming out is by really looking at the individual and meeting that individual need where they're at by making adjustments through those senses.
Okay, so a music teacher who first week of school, a lot of times they don't know their students coming in, Sure. So it's just a matter of learning their students or talking to the, general classroom teacher ahead of time. What students with special needs do you have? How can I adapt for them? Or kind of learning who's in that classroom is what I'm trying to say. So they know, they're aware of when that particular class is coming to them, what adaptations they need to make before they get there. Is that something you would suggest?
Absolutely. I think that the teachers are going to be teachers, and teachers' assistants are absolutely going to be your greatest resource as a music teacher. We get students for 30 minutes, maybe a little bit longer, but I mean, not much more than that each week. These teachers are with their students, all day long, and they know those ins and outs. They know when, I mean, I have teachers that they know from like the twitch of an arm that a student has been triggered and they need to remove them from the situation. I would never know that.
Right.
Because I don't have that breadth of information. I can read an IEP. I can, I can assess the student myself when I meet the student, but those teachers, they just know their kids, and going to them, keeping that line of communication open with them. Not only are they going to respect that you care about their student and you care about making those adaptations for that student, but they're also going to support music more. They're going to see that music isn't just, we're not only here for enrichment. We're also here because we're exposing students with special needs to a fundamental component of humanity, music, which is music, so building those relationships with teachers and support staff is integral to supporting the students in the adaptive music classroom.
I completely agree. And I like that you said that they're going to support the music class more when they know that you care about all their students. And when you come to them and say, hey, can you help me with this child? Like you said, they're aware of just an arm trigger or, an arm twitch triggering something, where the music teacher won't know all those things because you only see your kids a limited amount of time. So it's okay to admit. We don't know what we don't know. Right. Right. Yeah. And it's okay to admit, like, I can't do this by myself, and you need support. It's so important, the community in your school, to rely on each other. I think that's so important.
Absolutely.
So I definitely want to talk about students who are deaf or hard of hearing. I know you mentioned about technology adaptations that would work well with them. So I would love for you to touch base on that and let us know what those are.
Yeah. So I want to say that the technology that we're going to talk about right now in this moment is certainly may feel a little bit out of reach for some music instructors, simply because some of them are big budget items. But what I want to say is that there's definitely ways to adapt for students just right out of the gate. I just want to make it clear that if you don't have this crazy technology that I'm going to talk about, you can still make music accessible to deaf and hard of hearing students.
Right.
And maybe there's ways to get grants, or there's ways to increase accessibility, because the technology that we're going to discuss, it really doesn't only benefit deaf and hard of hearing students. It benefits all students with special needs, because there are so many barriers to entry, and the brain is stimulated in 10 different places that we know of with music. And some of our students with special needs, they may have blocks to certain, maybe 3 out of those 10, even 7 out of those 10 are blocked, but there's still 3 components available to us as a music instructor. So I think that any technology that you use to make music more accessible makes it accessible across the board, not just for students who are deaf or hard of hearing. But some of the technology that I use in my classroom, I do have visual sound systems. Those are light columns that sort of show, it's almost like reading a book of the music. It kind of shows the different pitches and frequencies of sound through color. So
I love that.
Yeah, it's so cool.
They're
amazing. And they have sort of like reds and oranges down at the bottom. And as you go up in frequency, you'll see, greens and yellows, and they blink on and off with the rhythm and the different frequencies of sound. I also have something called tactile audio devices, which are basically, our skin can hear up to 2,000 hertz of sound. Our ears can hear up to 20,000 hertz. So you can kind of see there is like a little bit of a disparity there, but experience is relative. So we can use that 2,000 hertz of sound through tactile audio devices. So
I never knew that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's amazing to know. It's like a light bulb moment.
Yeah. So our skin really can hear a high amount of frequency, and we can use that to our advantage. Tactile audio devices really magnify and amplify that experience. So what they are is incredibly designed technology that basically uses your skin as a hearing membrane. So the way in which the cochlea processes music and sound is mimicked on your back. So you can feel like the cellos booming in your, in your lower back, and like the whispers of the flute in your shoulders. You can literally feel like the plucking of the guitar on your spine. So those are pretty outstanding. And like I said, those are sort of the more big budget items, but I use everything from a big subwoofer speaker as well, which you can find that on Craigslist and throw it on a piece of wood and suddenly you've got a vibrating floor. You can use, I put a big giant piece of wood in the piano in my classroom so that my students can feel the vibrations of the piano through the wood. I mean, wood carries vibrations. It's a solid material. It carries those vibrations to be felt in a tactile way. I use the pieces of wood for students who can't reach the vibrating floor. I put the wood directly on the subwoofer speakers and then right onto their laps so that they can feel the vibrations through the wood right on their legs. So, I mean, and instruments themselves vibrate. You can play guitar and you can feel it directly through your fingertips. Even the humble balloon can be used on your chest to experience vibrations from, if music is playing, you can feel those vibrations through the balloon. And like I said, everything that I do in my adaptive music classroom is adjusted for sight and touch as well as sound. So everything I'm doing is, if we're feeling the vibrations of a piece of music, we're also watching, a certified interpreter signing the song, and watching a music video of the song. So there's that visual component, there's the tactile component, and, it really creates a well-rounded multisensory experience of music.
I love all of that. Yeah. So a couple of mind blown moments for me. The skin. I mean, goodness, I didn't realize that. And then also, I love your examples about the wood and being able to even place it on children's laps or bringing in a subwoofer. I mean, it makes me think like back to the 90s when that was all the rage, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, someone has that stored somewhere still, But I mean, it just makes me visually think of Beethoven. One of my favorite composer books is the book Beethoven Lives Upstairs, because it's letters back and forth, but just the pictures, you see that of him laying on the piano or even laying on the floor to compose. And I'm a pianist. And so that amazes me, that not being able to hear the sound, but being one of the greatest composers of all time. And so that example alone just goes to show you that people don't need to be held back by their limitations, and so viewing these kids, they're able to learn music just like any other child, is so important to realize that.
Absolutely. And I think, you say that example about Beethoven, and it makes me think of my kids that lie right on the floor, and in order to soak up the vibrations right into their whole body. I mean, I would venture to say that when I became a music teacher of students who are deaf and hard of hearing with disabilities, it completely changed my relationship to music. I mean, I had always just sort of thought of it as this auditory club for the hearing, and that's just what you think. That's just how your music is auditory. That's what you think. And then once I was opened up to this whole world, I had to force myself to be opened up to this whole world to figure out how am I going to reach these students through music who can't hear it. I had to learn how the ways in which music is a full body experience. And it really, truly changed my relationship to it and the power of it and its ability to, go beyond. I think in my book, I talk about how, music transcends. if it can't get in through one door, it finds a way in through a window. That's what it does. And so, no, I truly do not believe there is any student on the face of this earth that cannot have a relationship to music. It's just, it requires effort. It requires dedication on the part of the music instructor to find the way in. But once we do, that relationship can flourish for a lifetime.
Yeah. I'd love to touch on something you said earlier, this just came to my mind. I used to know 3 siblings. They all 3 had cochlear implants. And then I feel like there is a misconception that is the same as a hearing aid, but you said you teach those students differently, or you have to adapt music differently for those 2, hearing impairments. Can you give us, even quick examples of how you do it? How do you adapt music differently for those 2 things?
Sure. So hearing aids are really just amplifiers of sound. So the way a student hears with a hearing aid isn't going to be that much different from how you or I would hear the sound. It just amplifies it. Cochlear implants are more of I want to say, think of that like old AOL dial-up tone, that sort of like computery, that synthetic technological sound. That's the way I would imagine that, obviously I don't have the same experience as a cochlear implant wearer, but I would imagine that it's interpreted. And I think that the biggest difference in the way that I teach those students is students with cochlear implants have a more difficult time distinguishing like timbre and melody and like frequencies of sound. Higher sound is more challenging. So for those students, they really need that rhythm and bass beat to rely on to understand the sound fully. So really providing those lower frequencies of sound for those students. Dropping the keys of certain songs, playing songs that really have those strong bass elements, so that the student has something that their ear can grab onto and they can feel. Otherwise, the higher frequencies and sort of the more instrumental, like a piano concerto with like a solo piano concerto or something like that, that is going to be more challenging for a student with a cochlear implant.
Do you have suggestions for a music teacher where maybe a special needs learner is coming into the music room and they don't have a paraprofessional, or even if they do, how can they best teach music to these kids with making them feel like they're still a part of the class as well?
Absolutely. So I do think that we're getting into some sort of heavy territory here, where, I think a lot of administrators sort of feel that inclusion is this beautiful, wonderful thing. And in most cases it is, but for a lot of our special needs learners, they're going into these music classes and they're overstimulated by what's happening around them, the peers, the social aspect, or they're understimulated because they're musical savants. And Peggy over here is singing off key, and that's grating on them, and that just causes even other kinds of disruption. So I advocate for music instruction that meets the individual need when it comes to special needs learners. That's what I believe in. I believe that adaptive music instruction cannot just be lumped into general music education. I do believe it is a separate entity when it's done right and done to the level that students deserve and can benefit from. But I intend to start a nonprofit that will advocate for this and will hopefully provide all those resources, but it's not there yet. And I understand that here we are. Many of your listeners are probably like, well, I have this one kid in my class. I have no idea how to help them. What I can say is that when you're working with a group of 30 kids and you have that one student with special needs, use that para as much as you can. They are credentialed, experienced teachers that are there to help. They are there to support the student. They're not there to have a break. They're not there to have their coffee and sit on their phone. They are there to support the student. So I build paras directly into my lessons. Now my students are special needs across the board. So I don't have typically developing students in my classes. So sometimes in my classes, I have 5 paras to 5 students, which is a lot of personalities to manage and a lot of bodies to navigate in one room. But that's a whole other set of issues. I would say build that para right into your lesson plan. How are you going to utilize that para? You may have to modify one component of the lesson for that particular student so that they can access it. And I think that one of the things that can be helpful or maybe reassuring to understand is that in some cases of students with special needs, we don't know how much they are getting from what we're doing. We don't necessarily know. So with those students, I highly recommend watching for small incremental progress. If you feel like you have the student and they're coming in and they're disruptive and they're, you don't know if they're getting anything, look for that one little glimmer. And I call them in my book, I call them creative miracles. That's why my book is called Creative Miracles, A Practitioner's Guide to Adaptive Music Instruction. Those little glimmers of signs that you are reaching the student and transformation is happening and is possible and that what you're doing is working. It may take a year, it may take 5 years. It may never happen. But that dedication to that small incremental progress is what we have to do as music instructors. The other side of that is advocacy. If you have a student in your class and you are simply not able to meet their needs or you do not have the ability to meet their needs, then the school needs to do something about that. Either they need to get you more training, they need to find something for you to develop yourself more so you do feel confident in working with this student, or they need to find a qualified adaptive music instructor, someone with the background and credentials of working with this population to then be able to go out and teach music to that student in the way that that student needs.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
Does that help?
Oh, totally. No, I love
Okay,
all
good.
that. No, and the reason I gave the example of what do you do if a parent ends up not coming to music because, well, you gave they're not just there to be, on a coffee break. Well, I had the experience of a special needs child and the para was with them all day. And by the time they came to music and they would just get, I need to go out. And they would just keep disappearing and coming back. And it was really hard for me to speak up because I don't know why. I was a second year teacher, but it was like, I'm pretty sure they're supposed to be in here. But then it was like, well, and so I felt like I was like fending for myself and trying to adapt the lessons without any help when I had all these other kids. It's so hard. But so I like what you said about advocate for yourself. It's not you complaining and griping. You need help. If you need help, you have to clarify that and stick up for yourself because it's so important. Because the goal, like you said, is to teach music to these kids and you have to have help sometimes.
You have to be relentless in your pursuit for a relationship to music for each and every student.
Yes.
That's it's not about, you getting the support. I mean, it's indirectly about you getting the support that you need. It is about that kid is not getting their needs met because I'm not getting my needs met.
Right.
So you have to be relentless in the pursuit of that. You cannot let any kid go under your, fly under your radar because you're afraid to speak up for them or you are a second year teacher and you don't have the experience that you need. Well, the kid is missing out on music, which for students who are typically developing, we both know how important that is for them. But let me tell you, students with special needs, it is a lifetime intervention. It is, for many students with special needs, music isn't just a way in, it is the way in. So even though that student may be the most challenging student you have in that classroom, don't let them miss music for anything, for anything, especially a staff member that's supposed to be in the room.
Yeah.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Not your classroom, not your music class.
Yes.
No way.
Yes. I love that. Yes. That's amazing advice. Okay. So when it comes to, I know you said your class is it's just a classroom full of kids that have special needs.
Yeah.
And so I would love to hear your advice about this too. But when it comes to having the general ed class come in with the special needs learners, but also your experience with having a classroom full of special needs learners, how do you encourage them to just accept each other's needs and accept each other for who they are? Any advice around that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that what's amazing about my students is they do such a better job of that than we do. I think that they have patience, they have tolerance, they have acceptance just built into who they are in a way that, we in a fast-paced society don't necessarily have. And I think that we could learn something from them in regards to that, because they tolerate wait times more than me. When a student needs a 60-second wait time to process and then be able to respond to a question, that 60 seconds feels like interminable to me. Like I'm like, oh my gosh, or it's this dead silence and we're all waiting. But like the kids don't care. The kids around them don't care at all. They're totally supportive that this student needs that amount of time to process and be able to be successful in answering the question. So I think sometimes it's more us that we put that on ourselves, like, oh, this is taking too long. Oh, they're not getting it the way that I need them to. Oh, I think communication in my classroom is completely different. I might have 5 kids and one of them signs their response, one of them verbalizes their response, another uses a adaptive communication device to respond, another uses a yes or no head switch, and the third points to a visual, all in one class, because there's so many different degrees of needs. So I think just what we can do is create an environment from the get-go that allows for independent communication and tolerates the time it takes to process that. We might only get through one activity because our students need that time. That's okay. We have next week. I never cram things in so much so that, just because I need to check off a box.
Right.
It's about the students' needs and whatever their needs are on a given day. I have students that might come into the classroom and they might just, everything might be all over the place. They may not be able to sit still. And that's time to say, okay, we need to throw my plane out the window and do a calming meditation. That's where we're at today. And I have to be able to accept that and make it remember that it's about them and not me and my plan or boxes that need to be checked.
I love that. Just kids, we can learn a lot from them. They are a lot, better at accepting each other than I feel like, we are as adults even to each other,
Absolutely. I agree.
Yeah. So Kelly, I would love for you to share any closing thoughts or advice you have for our listeners today before we go.
Absolutely. So I would just say that if you have a student with special needs that you do not know how to reach, whether that is limited sound access, hearing loss, physical disabilities, cognitive, intellectual, emotional, learning, whatever they are, like I said, just don't give up on their relationship to music. That is our job. That is what we are there for, to facilitate that relationship, however that relationship looks. And it's going to look different for every student, especially students with special needs. But we need to remain steadfast and committed to that mission no matter what. And like I said, music will transcend. Music will find a way. And if you get really, really stuck and you really, really don't know what to do, you're going to email me. Yes. I'm going to help you, or you're going to read my book, which is Creative Miracles, A Practitioner's Guide to Adaptive Music Instruction, which will be out in the next, fingers crossed, month or so.
Yeah, that's so exciting.
And it really, this book, it lays out A to Z how to work with these unique populations, everything from working with staff and how to facilitate that relationship to making a genuine connection to your students to, adapting for all these different senses, adapting performance, adapting songwriting, all of these different things. The full gamut is in this book, as well as just the tales of these amazing students that I've had the privilege to work with, and how music has transformed their lives.
Oh, that's so exciting. I can't wait to get your book when it comes out too. I would love for you to let everybody know where they can connect with you and where they can find you online.
Absolutely. So you can find me at www.kellysurette, KELLYSURETTE.com, or you can email me at KB, B as in boy, Surette, SURETTE @gmail.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I'm so excited to have you on the podcast. This conversation's been amazing. And thank you for being a guest.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you so much for listening in to the Elementary Music Teacher Podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. And while you're there, I would love for you to review the show and leave a rating on iTunes. To find out more about how I can help you gain momentum in your elementary music teaching career, head to thedomesticmusician.com, where you'll find free downloads, courses, the blog, and so much more. Continue teaching music and never doubt the impact you're making each and every day in the lives of your students.